Thank you for joining in. Today, we're going to talk about Kubernetes backup, ransomware protection, and a lot more with Kasten K10 by Veeam. As quick introductions, we have David Hill, who will be doing an amazing demo for us. And my name is Gaurav Rishi, and I'm the VP of Product here at Kasten by Veeam. Let me run through a quick agenda that we're going to have as a part of this presentation. I'm going to talk about how we protect Kubernetes applications on AWS. We'll introduce the concept of the shared services platform. And then I'm going to dive in and talk about Kasten K10 by Veeam and how we are deeply integrated with AWS services so you can indeed back up those applications and mobilize them. We'll then again switch gears and I'll talk about a customer example or two and show you how they're using Kasten K10 by Veeam to protect their applications. And then finally, I'll hand it over to David Hill to walk you through a demo which actually will show what I would have just talked about. So let's dive right in. So first of all, I think all of us know that Kubernetes is global and it's growing. But let me put it in context. If you look at the statistics from IDC, there is going to be more applications developed in the next few years than they have been in the last 40 years, and these new applications are being built using cloud-native technologies. That is quite a Cambrian moment for us. Additionally, a lot of these applications are now running as containers, and you see that statistic of more than 75% of the enterprises now running these applications as containers. And then when you have these applications running as containers in production, you do need to have your data management functions up and running. And these include things like backup and recovery, which are important not only for regulatory reasons, but also because you might make mistakes, you might have a ransomware attack, and you need to recover. And that's where you need a Kubernetes native solution, because with this new ecosystem growth, the old backup solutions built for the hypervisor era just don't work. So let's talk about what does cloud-native technologies mean and how has that shifted the separation of concerns when it comes to software delivery. So on one side, we have infrastructure, and of course, here we are at AWS reInvent, and we have a lot to talk about that. And there is usually operation teams who are responsible for a shared infrastructure, and they do care about compute, networking, and providing the best of these resources so that the application teams, which is the other stakeholder, can build the best applications without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. That's what gets us at DevOps speed and scale in this cloud-native environment. But let me dig in a little bit more. This is the shared services platform architecture that Amazon has gone ahead and shared. And what this allows you to do is create a common platform that can be used by multiple applications. So if you look at the stack, you've got the compute, networking, storage, and then increasingly Kubernetes as your orchestration layer, whether it's EKS on the cloud or EKS anywhere on premises that provides the movement of workloads across physical nodes and clusters, and now even locations. So with the shared services platform architecture, if you look at the middle layer, what you see are building blocks that AWS provides so that applications can be built faster. You have building blocks to be able to go ahead and do CI/CD pipelines, to be able to do security and role access. And all of these capabilities is what helps to make sure that you can build these scalable applications and deploy them quickly. But what's missing? What is missing out here is how do you go ahead and back up and perform disaster recovery of your applications, which could be across sites, across availability zones, or AZs. And that's a problem that enterprises need to face and handle. Luckily, this is exactly what Kasten K10 by Veeam focuses on. So as AWS partners, we have been focusing on 3 use cases, and that makes up our key bread and butter. One of those use cases is backup and recovery. The way that works is we can go ahead and back up an entire application, which means the storage layer, the databases, as well as all the Kubernetes objects that make up that application, and we can go ahead and keep them in a secure location, like maybe an Amazon S3 after snapshotting them. In addition to that, we also have a second use case, which is application mobility. Kubernetes brought with it the promise of portability. Portability across infrastructure types, across locations, across clusters. And this is where we as Kasten K10 can move Kubernetes applications and rehydrate them in a completely different cluster, keeping in mind that maybe the new cluster might be running a different Kubernetes version, or maybe the underlying storage class might be different. And so without needing to recode applications, we can help move these applications too, which leads me to the third use case, which is disaster recovery. Now, this is, of course, a critical regulatory compliance need, but is, of course, great hygiene and an important thing to have in your portfolio, especially since we all seem to be reading headlines around ransomware attacks. We, as Kasten K10, can also go ahead and back up all of the applications and then move them into a completely different availability zone or a different region, and then rehydrate them in an intelligent manner. So now let me go ahead and switch gears and talk about what that partnership looks like from a technology perspective. So Kasten K10 works on AWS Kubernetes to give you these key use cases I spoke about. And there are a few levels of integration. First of all, as a part of that shared services platform architecture, when I look at AWS, we have the integrations with a lot of those, which includes at the storage level, the block, file, as well as the object layers. We also have integrations with the data services layer if you look at the top. One of the features we see in the cloud native development environment is that a single application could be using multiple databases under the covers. It could be a SQL or a NoSQL one, and it could be run as a managed database, or it could be a database running in your own clusters. Regardless, Kasten K10 has integrations with each one of them, and we can actually extend those integrations. So we do have blueprints, as we call them, for things like Amazon RDS or Postgres running in your own cluster. Not only do we have integrations with EKS, EKS Anywhere, Red Hat OpenShift, we also support bringing your own Kubernetes, and that is a part of our nightly builds. So we make sure that every release of Kasten K10 is tested before we ship it to you. And what that allows you is a seamless way to be able to deploy Kasten K10 so it can recognize your applications and then start protecting them. And the deployment of this is super simple too. You have a single line Helm command, or you can even go to Amazon Marketplace and choose from a variety of options to be able to go ahead and meet whatever your requirements are. So the flexibility of being able to pay on a pay-as-you-go basis, so on a dollar per node per hour basis, or to have term licenses, and to work in hybrid environments, both on AWS Cloud as well as clusters which might be running on premises, is something that Kasten supports. So now let me dive in a little deeper and talk about how does Kasten K10 work in this new DevOps environment and with these new cloud native applications that are going through this explosive growth. So what you see in the picture out here in the dotted blue line is a simple X-ray of a cloud native application. There are two microservices under the covers that make up this application. One's running in a pod on the left-hand side, connected to a storage disk through a persistent volume claim, or PVC as the short form is. And then on the right-hand side, you see microservice number 2, which is connected and is using some database. This database could be a managed database like Amazon's RDS, or it could be a PostgreSQL running in your own cluster like I mentioned. When you need to back up an application now, what you need to back up is not only the storage and the database that I talked about, but also the hundreds and thousands of Kubernetes objects that make up that application. These objects could be config maps, which store some of your configuration information for security, networking, compute, as well as maybe your secrets. And so Kasten K10, after being installed, within a matter of a few minutes, will automatically discover all of the applications running in your cluster. It'll go ahead and take those applications and create a dependency map, similar to this simple picture that you're seeing, so we know what are the different persistent volumes, different databases that make up that application. And then it's as easy as setting up a policy to say how often you want those applications to be backed up. And once you have those backing up, they could be securely moved in an infrastructure independent way into something like an Amazon S3, so that when and if the time comes to rehydrate them to recover from a disaster or from a ransomware attack, you can go ahead and actually do that again with a few simple clicks, but the new environment could be a different one. Maybe you're now going ahead and recovering in the cloud while your original backing up was done for a cluster that was on premises. So Kasten K10 also performs the rehydration in an intelligent manner where applications are complex. Maybe microservice 2 needs to be brought up only after microservice 1 is done. So Kasten K10 provides you a way to perform this in a coordinated manner. And in addition to the blueprints that I had talked about, where we already have created them for some of the common databases, you can also, if using Kasten K10, write your own blueprints and define your own coordination logic. So an extremely powerful construct that scales with you. As an example, let's look at one of the world's largest companies who uses Kasten K10 and runs their infrastructure on AWS. So this is a financial firm, and of course, security is extremely important. And they have a complex set of applications that are running across 3 different availability zones, as you see in this picture. If you look at it, Kasten K10, like I said, is easily installable in a cluster. It automatically discovers and is integrated with not only the underlying storage layer, you can see EBS listed out there along with other storage types, but it is also integrated with a growing number of databases, and you see Mongo, for example, listed out there. The customer in this particular case is using EKS as the Kubernetes distribution, and they want to make sure that these applications are gone ahead and backed up in a regular way, and then they have the capability of being able to recover them. So like I talked about in my earlier slide, first of all, Kasten K10 has been built for Kubernetes. We have talked about the fact that applications that were built for the hypervisor era just don't work in this environment, because your pods are always getting rescheduled to new nodes, to different types of clusters potentially. And so in this particular case, having an approach where Kasten K10 uses applications as the unit of atomicity was extremely important. The second piece of it is Kubernetes is still a young, though of course fast-growing ecosystem. And so finding the right skills is important and is hard to get. So you want to make sure that you have a solution that is really easy to use. So not only do we end up using Kubernetes native APIs under the covers, Kasten K10 also has a really easy to use user interface, which can get you up and running in a few minutes. And that was a key consideration too. And then finally, backups are your last line of defense. So security is extremely important. And that's an overloaded term, of course. You want to make sure that your applications are encrypted, not only when you're taking a snapshot, but maybe when you're going ahead and moving them to S3 for resilience reasons. But you also want to make sure that Kasten K10 itself is secure, and that's where we don't ask for credentials. We can take an assumed IAM role, for example, and make sure that we reduce our own surface area. Additionally, we are launch partners for BottleRocket, and so we are also going ahead and innovating in security for containers in multiple paths. So now let me share a few more customer examples so I can bring to life how companies are using this. So let's move over to Europe. Sopra Steria is one of Europe's largest IT services firm. They work with a lot of big government agencies. And if you look at the picture here, in some ways it's similar to the one you saw in the previous slide. But the difference being, in addition to running their applications on AWS cloud, they also have applications that they need to have running and data that they need to secure on premises. So it's a hybrid architecture. Additionally, in this case, they are running OpenShift as the Kubernetes distribution, while the previous slide was showing it as EKS. So Kasten, of course, supports both, and AWS Cloud also supports a variety of different Kubernetes distributions. In this particular case, they wanted to make sure that not only were the applications being backed up in an automated way, they wanted to make sure that they could go ahead and move them in a place which was relevant for the sovereignty compliance aspects of it. And so Kasten K10 not only allowed them to set up these automation policies, so they needed very few people to be able to work across hundreds of applications and manage them from a backup and disaster recovery perspective and set up the automation rules for them. But they also were very impressed with the fact that Kasten K10 could work across not just the storage layer, but the database layer, so you have a higher level of granularity. So again, from our perspective, like we talked about, application centricity is extremely important. We want to work at DevOps speed and scale. And in this context, what it means is the application owners should be able to go ahead and look at just their set of applications and be able to recover parts of the application when they need to through a self-service portal. And that's what brings you to this point about working at quick scale. And maybe this particular quote sums it out best, where the CTO of Sopra Steria provided that Kasten K10 provided us with a simple and scalable solution that worked well in the AWS environment. So here's one example, but let me shift gears and share another example with you, which is as exciting, if not more. Now, this is actually a case study that you can also read with AWS, but let me talk about DevSecOps and shift left. Now, what we're seeing is in the old world, you used to think about day two management tasks like backup and recovery as an afterthought almost. Once you had your applications up and running, you would think about having a day two function of saying, now let me make sure I also have compliance checks so I can back up my application. In the new cloud native world, where we're talking about secure DevOps, what this is resulting in is some of these critical functions like backup and recovery almost being baked into your golden stack, so it becomes a day zero function. So that's where shift left comes in. And what I mean by that is essentially, you want to make sure that your application owners who are developing applications don't really need to think about backup. However, there should be something as a part of the initial cluster where you can have this golden stack that is securing the applications without the application owners really needing to worry about it. And when the time does come for them to recover it, they should be able to seamlessly do it. So, if I kind of go again and share this particular quote, this value proposition was very clear to the DevSecOps architects. They said they got to know that Kasten K10 by Veeam for backing up and restoring was the right application for them the very first day they tried it out. So let me share a little bit of what this customer, which is Leidos, is doing. So first of all, Leidos is a tier 1 prime contractor, works with a lot of the government agencies. They are, of course, very security conscious. So they actually work on AWS GovCloud, and Kasten K10, of course, works with them on that. And they have a lot of developers who are spread across multiple continents. So there are these applications which need to be brought up. They are always being developed. And because they are so security conscious, the initial cluster bring up and the golden stack needed to have a compliance check, which used to take something like 45 days. And that was slowing them down. And of course, that's not how DevOps speed and scale works. So Kasten K10 helped them on multiple fronts as we worked with AWS on this one. First of all, Kasten K10 became a part of this golden stack. So in addition to some of the tools like Jira, GitLab, Jenkins, Kasten K10 was also a part of this golden stack that brings up every time a cluster is brought up. And the reason they did that was because these particular Kasten K10 configurations allow you to set up forward-looking policies. And what I mean by that is, as soon as a cluster is brought up and an application is introduced, Kasten K10 will automatically recognize that, and it'll go ahead and use the policy, which has been this forward-looking policy, to start protecting it, to make sure that it's being backed up at regular intervals, it's being sent to the right secure location. And that actually helped them not only on the backup aspects of it, it also helped them get into this habit of being able to tear down and bring up clusters at a much more scalable and reduced time of way, where the 30 to 45 days went down to a few days, and it's constantly being improved. Another example of about how Kasten K10 is not only helping you with the part related to backup, but also moving faster in this new environment. Now let me talk about something that we all seem to be unfortunately reading about in the news, and that's about ransomware. Now that's another scourge today, and what's really important is I had mentioned that backup is your last line of defense. So you do need to make sure that all the backups of applications that you have got and you've kept them in a secure location are immutable. You don't want those to be corrupted because then you lose your last line of defense. And so immutability is something that is extremely important, not only for ransomware, as we were going to talk about, but also for maybe sometimes you might have an accident deletion, and we all make mistakes, or you have hardware failures, and that also is something that we want to take care of. And of course, there is governance and compliance reasons where immutability is actually a hard requirement. So Amazon S3 as an object store supports object-level immutability, and Kasten was the first one in the industry to give you a solution for Kubernetes ransomware recovery along with AWS. And the way that works is not only do we under the covers leverage immutability so that you have the worm or the write once, read many option so that any backup that you have gone ahead and stored and secured is possible to be read but not written again, and that makes it immutable. But we do it in a way which is extremely simple. Now imagine yourself, if you are under a ransomware attack, you are under a lot of pressure to make sure that your organization's assets can be recovered. You get that entire application back up and running. And the longer you take, while you're working under pressure, maybe your ransomware amount continues to grow. This is where Kasten K10 comes in, and the simplicity aspects which customers loved anyway were highlighted even more when working in this particular environment. And also the fact that you automate a lot of these tasks reduces the amount of mistakes or the number of mistakes that you potentially might make while working under pressure and still needing to work at scale. And then finally, the freedom of choice is extremely important. I had talked about the fact that portability is important, but it's important for a couple of reasons. Of course, you want the best technical architecture, but from a cost perspective, you also want to have the freedom of choice to pick and choose the vendors, whether it's storage or whether it's the locations across hybrid environments, so that you can go ahead and make sure that you're not just to save yourself from ransomware, moving the costs into something else, like forcing down a particular underlying infrastructure. So Kasten K10, being infrastructure agnostic, gives you that freedom of choice to work across environments, across storage providers, and that's extremely important too. With that same point around freedom of choice, I'm also happy to talk about Kasten being a launch partner for Amazon's EKS Anywhere. Amazon's EKS Anywhere gives you an on-premises Kubernetes distribution which is managed. So the same level of simplicity that you love and might be using on the cloud with EKS is now available for you on Amazon EKS Anywhere on premises in your data centers. What Kasten K10 provides in partnership here is essentially a way to now not only back up your entire applications across clusters that now span across both cloud and on-premises through a single console, and we'll look at that in a demo, but it also allows you the capability to be able to go ahead and move applications. You might have started your application development on premises on EKS Anywhere, and you now need to move it to Amazon EKS, or maybe vice versa. For DR reasons, you might want some of your applications which are running in the cloud to be rehydrated in Amazon EKS Anywhere for test dev reasons or DR reasons. And this is another thing where K10 makes it quite seamless for you. And we'll look at that again in a demo. So with that, let me tee up a demo where you're going to have David walk you through an example of backing up applications, looking at how you back up across these hybrid environments, and then also mobilize your applications so you can move them from one cluster to another cluster that span locations. So let's go to the demo.
Hi, and welcome to this demo of AWS EKS and Kasten K10 by Veeam. In this demo, we'll deploy a new EKS cluster in the US East 2 region with Terraform. We'll then install Kasten K10 by Veeam into this new EKS cluster. We'll then install an application and demo backup and recovery. Then we'll enable multi-cluster dashboard in K10 and link an EKS Anywhere cluster. And finally, we'll migrate an application from US East 2 to EKS Anywhere. Here we are in the lab, and we're going to use Terraform to deploy a new EKS cluster quickly and easily. You can use the same scripts that are being used in this demo from the URL listed on the screen. Once our Terraform scripts have run, we'll go over to the Amazon AWS console, and you can validate that our EKS cluster is now up and active. We'll use a simple kubectl git nodes command to validate that all our nodes are indeed up and running. And they are. Use 3 simple commands to get Kasten K10 by Veeam installed into our new EKS cluster. We're going to use helm repo add to add the Kasten repo. We'll create a new namespace for Kasten, and we'll use a simple helm install command to install Kasten K10. Once our helm install command has completed, we'll use kubectl get pods to validate that all the pods are running. And they are. We'll use kubectl get svc to get the service endpoint for our Kasten K10 dashboard. This is how we access the Kasten K10 interface. We'll highlight that URL and we'll put that into our browser to get access to Kasten K10. Here we are. We'll paste in our Kubernetes token, and we'll log in initially and accept the EULA. And here we are into the Kasten K10 interface dashboard. As you can see, it's a nice, clean HTML5 interface that automatically discovers any installed Kubernetes applications. Since this is a brand new cluster, all we're seeing is the single default namespace. Let's install our first application. I like to use WordPress as a great test application for Kubernetes clusters because it installs a database backend with 2 persistent volume claims. You can install WordPress using the commands listed on the screen. Once that helm install command has completed, we can go back to Kasten K10 and see that it automatically discovers the new WordPress application. You can click Details on the application pane to view all the application details, including the persistent volume claims, config details, and the networking details. Let's grab the service endpoint for this WordPress application and validate that we can access the application through a web browser. Let's highlight the service endpoint, and we'll put that in our browser and validate that we can access WordPress and that it's indeed online. And it is. To protect this application, the first thing that we need to do is set a location profile. Location profiles are where Kasten K10 protects data to. In this case, we're going to use AWS S3 bucket with object lock enabled. Object lock will protect our application against ransomware and other malicious activity that might delete or otherwise modify our backup data. Let's enable immutable backups, validate the bucket, and set our protection period. This will guarantee that our data is unmodifiable or removable for that period. As you can see, Kasten K10 lets you know that object immutability has been enabled. Let's create our first backup policy for this WordPress application. We'll set our backup frequency, make sure that we enable our backups to our S3 object bucket. validate our settings, and create our policy. Let's click Run Once to run this policy now. From the K10 dashboard, we can watch the progress of our backup. In the action pane here, we can watch the policy being run, and we can click on it for more details. And our application backup should be nearly complete. And it is. You can now see that our application has been protected. Let's delete this application now so that we can test our recovery functionality. We're going to use kubectl delete namespace to completely delete the WordPress application. As you can see, the application is now gone from the K10 dashboard. However, if we go down to status, we can actually see the removed application from here. And this allows us to recover the application. Let's select our recovery point and click Restore. This will restore the application back to its original location. We can watch the restore in progress from the K10 dashboard. And once our restore is complete, we can see that the application has been returned to the dashboard. And we can validate that the application has indeed been recovered. By checking its service endpoint. And let's validate that we can access the application again in a web browser through the URL. And our WordPress application is back online. To initially set up multi-cluster dashboard, it's a single command using the K10 multi-cluster tool from the command line. Once K10 multi-cluster dashboard has been enabled, you can see that we have a new multi-cluster dashboard interface within Kasten K10. This allows us to link any number of Kubernetes clusters and distributions and access them all from a single K10 interface. As you can see, we have our EKS US East 2 primary Kubernetes cluster. And now what we want to do is add our secondary cluster here. And in this case, it's an EKS Anywhere cluster. Just by pasting the contents of the kube config for the secondary cluster, K10 automatically discovers the properties of that cluster. We can give that cluster a friendly name here. I'm going to call it EKS Anywhere. With the ingress URL for the Kasten K10 interface installed on that cluster. And validate our final settings and click Add Clusters. Kasten K10 automatically imports that secondary cluster into this dashboard. One final step is to grant full permissions from this K10 over to that secondary cluster, and Kasten K10 makes that very, very easy by auto-populating the permissions dashboard and cluster role binding. Role binding has been completed, and we now have full access to both clusters from a single interface. If I click on the EKS Anywhere card, that'll take us to the EKS Anywhere cluster, and you can see that we only have one application installed in this, and that's the default namespace. And finally, we want to migrate this WordPress application from our US East 2 cluster over to our EKS Anywhere cluster using the process of exporting an application and importing an application. We're going to create an export policy for WordPress. We're going to copy our import policy code and watch as Kasten K10 prepares WordPress for import into a secondary cluster. Once our export policy is complete, we are now ready to import WordPress into the EKS Anywhere cluster. We'll create a new import policy. Select Restore after import. Review any options. We'll paste in the config data for import that we collected during the export process. And let's click Create Policy. Let's run this policy now to start the import process. We can follow along with the import process right here in the Kasten K10 dashboard. Once the WordPress import has been successfully completed, let's validate that everything is online. Our namespace exists for WordPress. Let's check the persistent volume claims. Those are online as well. The application is available inside of our EKS Anywhere dashboard. Everything looks healthy. But just to be sure, let's grab the service endpoint for that namespace, and we will validate that we can reach the application through its web interface. kubectl get svc. Let's highlight that URL. And we've confirmed that our WordPress application has been successfully imported. That's it for our demo. Thanks for watching.
So, well, I hope you enjoyed the demo that brought to life how simple it is to go ahead and make your applications secure from a backup and DR and mobility perspective, the three use cases we talked about. But I did want to leave you, which might be an eye chart for you, but the point I want to make out here is there are a lot of capabilities that we have built into Kasten K10 as we engage with various customers across the globe. And so we are enterprise ready right now, both in terms of scale, in terms of the number of deployments, because we know backup is important. But for a second, if you look at the operations support, which is the last column on this chart, the point I want to make is we make it extremely simple for you with a simple to use enterprise dashboard to be able to back up your applications just in a matter of a few minutes. Not only do we have cloud native integrations into these cloud native tools like Prometheus and Grafana and alert managers, we also work in an air-gapped environment. For a lot of our customers who work in hybrid models, this is an extremely key requirement. And then Kasten K10 itself, of course, DRs itself, and we are highly available. So with that said, I did want to leave you with a couple of resources so that you can go ahead and not only look at other customer case studies, but also try out Kasten K10 for yourself. There are a few different ways of doing it. You can go to the simple URL and you have a fully featured available version of Kasten K10 that you can try for yourself on your favorite environment. Or you can go to AWS Marketplace and click on the link there and get up and running really quickly. We do look forward to hearing about any questions that you might have, and thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you about this. Thank you very much.